"There's danger," Ivan yelled, slowing the cart. "Hop on." "Well, hey there, you old Russian bastard," Mario slurred as he stumbled and nearly fell. He squinted beyond at the horde that was gaining fast. "What's you got here? Damn, those are some pretty awesome costumes. Reminds me of my last family reunion." With that, he bent over, slapped his knee, and croaked a wet laugh. Ivan dared to stop the cart. He pulled beside the drunk and reached out and grabbed his arm. "They're not costumes. Now get in. There's no time." Mario stood and gave another look at the horde. "What are you talking about? It's Halloween." "Get in," Ivan urged. "Now." Mario yanked his arm away. "Let me be," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "This is awesome. How much are you charging for it? Because it's pretty damn scary." "Ivan," Rory said, "they're getting close." Alligator Man pulled ahead of the horde. As it ran by Mudman, it shoved him to the side, making him stumble. Ivan wanted to help Mario, but his ultimate responsibility was keeping the boys safe. He jumped out of the cart, grabbed Mario by the back of his jacket, and tossed him onto the seat beside Rory. He slid back behind the wheel and slammed his foot down on the accelerator just as Alligator Man reached and clawed at Rory. The wheels squealed as the cart took off. Rory held onto the support bar with one hand and Mario with the other, trying to keep him from falling onto the road. Alligator Man barely missed grabbing Rory's leg. Mario hooted and slapped his knee again. "Damn, that's one hell of a costume. It looks so real. And whoo, what a ride." "It is real," Rory said. "Some witches done conjured 'em up." Mario snorted. "Yeah, sure. And my wife is a Victoria's Secret model." Just then, an old Ford truck rounded the curve ahead of them. The headlights washed over the golf cart and its train of monsters. The sight must have startled the driver because the truck screeched to a stop. The driver attempted to turn around and pulled in front of the speeding golf cart. Ivan swerved and Mario fell off the cart onto the road. He rolled into the oncoming horde. Mudman did not break stride as he stepped onto Mario's legs, breaking them with a wet snap, and kept chasing the cart. Mario screamed in pain as splintered bones ripped through his skin. Alligator Man smelled the blood and stopped. He turned and snatched Mario's arm just as the two-faced bear grabbed his legs. The two beasts attempted to wrestle Mario from each other. Mario's screaming was hysterical, sounding as if it shredded his vocal cords. Alligator Man gave up trying to pull Mario from the bear and bit off his arm. Rory watched as the three dead girls stopped chasing the cart. For some reason, he inwardly referred to them as the Cadaver Girls. They also began tearing at Mario, and after what seemed an eternity, Mario's screams trailed off into wet gurgles. Rory's backward-facing seat gave him a front-row view of the carnage. He was too shocked to speak. He felt his stomach heave, and he leaned over and vomited. When he finished, he glanced over his shoulder and saw that Stevie had been spared the worst of it. He had only just now turned in his seat, but the red taillights from the cart cast the scene behind them in a visceral red glow. "They ate him?" Stevie asked. "Uh-huh," Rory said, wiping his chin. Ivan was too focused to look back. He swerved around the truck, barely missing the ditch. "What's happening?" "Mudman is right behind us," Stevie said. "And the others, they be eating Mr. Mario," Rory said, his voice shaky. As if on cue, the beasts finished tearing Mario's body and resumed their chase. The truck finally got turned around and headed after the golf cart. Mudman ran around the side of the truck, and whether out of fear or an attempt to buy Ivan and the boys some time, the driver swerved into Mudman. The side mirror clipped him, tearing off a chunk of his hip and knocking him into the ditch. Mudman gave an angry, gurgling growl as the cursed mud reformed around the missing chunk. and he pulled himself out of the ditch and resumed his chase. "There's the field," Ivan yelled. "Hang on." He wrenched the steering wheel to the right, turning onto the gravel lane that led into the field. He hoped Granny Dingo was on her way, because once they were in the field, it was going to be more difficult to stay away from the horde. He glanced back and saw that the truck zoomed by, and to his surprise, Mudman did not turn into the field. Instead, he ran after the truck. And even more surprising, the gore-covered horde followed. He made a wide circle, turning back toward the road, and stopped. "What happened?" Stevie said. "Why did they stop following us?" I'm not sure," Ivan said. "The truck hit Mudman," Rory said, "and it tore off a piece of him. What if it somehow transferred the curse to the guy driving the truck?" Ivan took a moment to consider this possibility. "I guess that makes as much sense as anything else." "What do we do now?" Stevie asked. Ivan gave a resigned sigh. That was Alvin McBee in the truck. He's not the smartest man in the world, and he'll lead that horde straight into town. We can't let that happen. There's no telling how big the body count will be. He stomped on the accelerator and turned onto the county road and gave chase to the horde, careful not to get too close until he figured out a solution to stop them. Since the original plan was now blown to hell, he had no other choice but to call Sheriff Mosley. Sheriff Mosley was a man who had seen a lot of action in Iraq. After retiring from the war business, he moved to what he thought would be a sleepy little town and ran for sheriff. Immediately after being sworn in, he was exposed to the paranormal underbelly of Nevermore. Most of the townsfolk understood that Nevermore was different from other towns, but refused to acknowledge it was due to the supernatural. But Mosley, being once and always a soldier, knew that the best way for him to serve the people who had entrusted their safety to him was to accept, adapt, and overcome. And he had done exactly that concerning the supernatural. Ivan snatched his cell phone from his pocket and dialed the sheriff's number. Mosley answered on the second ring. "It's never a good sign when you call, Ivan," Mosley said. "It's about to get as bad as it's ever been," Ivan said. "I have a horde of 6 monsters headed toward town." "How did that come about?" Mosley asked. "The Brousseau sisters," Ivan said. "I should have known that would be the answer," Mosley said. "They don't have the sense God gave a goose. Keep me updated. I'll be headed your way. I'll send a couple of deputies, but first I'll use the rest of the department to set up a defensive line a mile outside of the town. We can't let those monsters into town, especially not tonight. There's people and kids everywhere trick-or-treating." Ivan disconnected the call and handed his phone to Stevie. "I have Big Mama's number in there. Call her and tell her what's going on and ask them if they're on their way." Stevie called but got no answer. He left a message and handed the phone back to Ivan. He looked forward and saw that they were about a half a mile away from a sharp curve. Beyond that curve was the glow of lights. "That's Winona's," he said. "Yeah," Ivan said. He suddenly had an idea. "If we can get Alvin to turn in there, we can stop him from leading the horde into town." Rory had turned and was on his knees in the seat facing forward. "But our moms be working there." "I know," Ivan said. "And they've worked there long enough to have lived through some terrible things. You know that's where some of the most dangerous things have happened over the years." Stevie gave a knowing nod to Rory. They both knew their moms were tough, and on those crazy and even deadly occasions during their shifts at Winona's Waffle Hut, they always would come home and tell the boys. Both women knew that keeping such important knowledge about the town from their boys when they were alone so much of the time would have been terrible parenting. They told them everything, then had discussions with the boys on how they could best protect themselves. "I'll call Mom and let her know we're coming and to be preparing," Rory said. He took out his phone. "She'll let Winona and Isaac know." "Good," Ivan said. I'm going to try to pull alongside Alvin. That means we're going to have to get close to the horde. Keep aware." Ivan punched the cart, forcing it to go faster, and swerved around the horde. The 3 cadaver girls were the slowest, and as they drove past them, they were able to see that 2 were in an advanced state of decay, and 1 seemed only a few days dead. They all looked similar, with shoulder-length red hair. Each of them had an X painted across their face. Each X was a different color: orange, red, purple. The girl with the purple X made eye contact with Rory as they sped past. Her face was mottled gray and black, the center of the purple X intersecting just below her nose, which something had been eating on. Her slimy, cataract-covered eyes settled on Rory, and she grimaced, showing algae-covered teeth. Rory tore his eyes away, looked past her loping run at the girl with the orange X scrawled across her face. She had no eyes. They were ragged sockets, caked with mud that was filled with tiny, writhing creatures. "She can't see," he thought. "She must know where she's going because of the magic." Ivan pulled ahead of the horde, dodging Alligator Man as he turned and snapped a snout full of razor-sharp teeth at him. He pulled alongside the truck and motioned for Alvin to roll down the window. "Turn in at Winona's," he yelled. Alvin nodded and yelled back, "Way ahead of you. I ain't stupid enough to lead these things into town. I already called Winona. She's ready." Ivan nodded, having a deeper appreciation for Alvin. He slowed and pulled in behind the truck, careful to stay ahead of Mudman and the horde. Alvin swerved into the parking lot of Winona's Waffle Hut, which was surprisingly busy for Halloween night. It was lighted by 6 old mercury vapor street lamps. They cast jaundiced cones of light down onto the pavement. Ivan swung in behind him. Ivan glanced at the diner and saw that Isaac, a young black man who was Winona's second in charge, was holding the door open with one hand, holding a pistol in the other. Winona, a stout woman of 40, stood a few feet in front of him with a shotgun. She motioned for them to pull right up to the door. Alvin parked a few feet away and jumped out of the truck, leaving it running. He was carrying his own shotgun and ran inside. Ivan pulled right up to the door, and Stevie and Rory jumped off and ran inside. He glanced back and saw that the horde had stopped at the edge of the parking lot, as if not sure they should step into the light. "Ivan," Winona said in greeting. "Winona," Ivan replied. Then he turned to Isaac and nodded. "What did you bring us?" Isaac said. "A homunculus," Ivan said. "I figured that's what the big one was," Winona said. "But what are those others?" "I suspect the 3 girls were killed by some psycho and were dumped in Candy's River," Ivan said. "The others are a mutated bear and alligator." "I see," Winona said. "How did it come about?" Isaac asked. Ivan shook his head in disgust. "3 very stupid witches," he said. "They tried to raise the homunculus and somehow cursed the spot in the river where they got the mud." Mudman stood at the edge of the parking lot, as if afraid of stepping into the first cone of light. He reached out with one massive hand and waved it in the yellow beam. When he realized that the light posed no threat, he reared his head back and gave a gurgling roar. He took a tentative step into the parking lot. "Time to get inside," Winona said. Ivan reached back into the golf cart and retrieved his own Glock 9mm. He stepped inside, followed by Winona and Isaac. Winona locked the door and surveyed the situation. She had Charlie, her short-order cook, 2 waitresses, who were Rory and Stevie's mothers, and 7 patrons. She was not sure how many of them were packing, but she and Alvin had shotguns. Ivan had his 9mm, and Isaac had his Ruger 45. She knew that would not likely be enough firepower, especially against an undead horde. "Okay," she said to the group. "You all are regular patrons. You come here knowing that sooner or later some weird-ass crap is going to go down. I appreciate your business, and I suspect and hope at least some of you are carrying tonight." Before anyone could answer, Steve Hall, one of the school board members and not a regular patron, stood and made his way to the door. "I'm out," he said. "I'm not staying here." "Where do you think you're going?" Winona asked. She pointed to the edge of the parking lot. "How do you think you're going to get past those?" Steve was one of those academic types that taught not for the love of expanding knowledge, but so that he could lord his intellect over the students. And because of that, he was despised by the kids. And after he had gotten elected to the school board and began pushing some extremely unpopular agendas into the schools, he was also despised by the parents. He was one of the townsfolk who refused to admit that the crazy stuff that regularly happened in Nevermore was paranormal. He believed that everything could be explained with reason and logic. "It's Halloween," he said, "and it's clear that this is some sort of trick. Those are some very convincing costumes, but they are costumes nonetheless. I'm going home so that I don't have to deal with any of this nonsense." Rory still looked pale from witnessing the horde tear into Mario. "It be real, Mr. Hall. They chased us all the way from the trailer park, and they done ate Mr. Beck. It was terrible." Steve looked down on Rory and frowned as if he were offended by his Cajun patois. "Don't be an imbecile. It's just a bunch of hoi polloi dressed in costumes. Out of my way, Winona. I'm a citizen, and you can't force me to stay here against my will." Winona wanted to tell him that was a bold statement coming from a man who proposed that the schools teach the children that owning property was a crime against humanity, and that the human population needed to be reduced by any means necessary. But she kept her tongue. She strongly believed that folks should be free to speak their minds and go about their lives, being left alone to follow their dreams. Folks should be able to make their own decisions. So she unlocked the door and allowed Steve to step into the parking lot. She locked the door behind him and watched as he made his way to his new BMW. "He tells others they shouldn't own property," she thought, "when he drives a luxury car and lives in one of the bigger homes in Nevermore." "You just gonna let him go?" Willie Aaron said. He was a middle-aged black man, and he was the owner of Willie's Auto Repair, a good man and fellow business owner who Winona respected. "I know he's an elitist ass, but he's gonna get killed." "He made his choice," Winona said. "If he changes his mind, I'll let him in." The horde seemed oblivious to Steve. Mudman stood in front of the others, cautious of stepping into the lighted parking lot. He again stuck his massive hand into the jaundiced beam, testing the danger. When he realized that it posed no danger, he turned his muddy sockets toward Steve. Steve was halfway between the diner and the road. Clinging to his erroneous belief that the monsters were townsfolk in costume, he defiantly refused to look at Mudman and the horde. He used the remote to unlock the car. The lights flashed and the horn beeped, and it was as if the horde had received a jolt. Mudman gave a gurgling roar and charged into the parking lot, directly toward Steve, followed by the Cadaver Girls. Alligator Man and the Bear fanned out on each side, but headed toward the diner. Mudman's roar was so inhuman that Steve couldn't help but look. The horde rushed into the light, and he was able to see more clearly. And he saw the truth. His eyes shot wide. He dropped his keys, reached down to grab them, but accidentally kicked them under the car. He realized he didn't have enough time to find them, and instead of getting into the car and locking the doors, he tore off in a panic toward the diner. His eyes were wide and his mouth hung open. Winona unlocked the door and stepped outside, shotgun at the ready. "Hurry!" she yelled. She aimed and fired off a shot at Mudman, who was in the lead. The buckshot blew off a chunk of dark mud, but did not slow the beast. Steve was 30 yards away, running with wild-eyed fear. The horde was closing fast. Ivan stepped through the door, coming alongside Winona, and fired off 3 shots with his pistol. He scored 3 hits, one on Mudman, the other 2 in the Alligator Man. But it did nothing to slow them. Steve looked over his shoulder, screamed, lost his balance, and fell face first onto the pavement. He pushed himself up, revealing a split lip and 2 broken teeth, and tried to run. Winona and Ivan fired off shots, hoping to buy him some precious time. But Mudman ran up behind him and smacked the back of his head with a giant fist, crushing Steve's skull. Steve fell, still alive but clearly no longer in control of all of his mental faculties. He was drooling and mumbling incoherently. "But I'm smart. Can't live without me. I'm smart." One eye was bulging from its socket. Winona was afraid that it was going to pop right out and dangle on his cheek. But before that happened, the horde was up on him. Alligator Man picked him up and slammed him back down onto the pavement. Steve screamed. The cadaver girls ran up and began tearing at him, grabbing his hair, clawing his arms, tearing his clothes away, and biting his flesh. Winona turned and stepped back inside the diner. The patrons were mortified, shocked. "Don't look, boys," she said. And Rory and Stevie looked away, but they could not tune out Steve's screams. Ivan stepped in behind her and locked the door. After an eternal moment, Steve stopped screaming. The cadaver girls and Alligator Man continued to tear at him. Mudman stood, glaring at the front of the diner. The bear shambled over and scooped up some of the gore that had gotten splattered around. "How are we going to stop them from smashing through the windows, Winona?" Willie asked. "A while back, after we got attacked by that thing calling itself the Tooth Fairy, I had the windows replaced with shatterproof glass," Winona said. "They'll get through eventually, but it just might buy us enough time to find out how to kill these bastards." "I left my pistol in the truck," Willie said. "Sorry. I should have known better, it being Halloween and all." "Don't worry about it," Winona said. "There's an extra 12-gauge under the counter. You can use it." She turned her attention to the other 5 patrons. "Any of you packing?" Dean, a big bear of a man, shook his head, a look of disappointment on his face. "I have a rifle in the truck." He pulled a kukri, which was a very large military-style knife, from its sheath attached to his belt. "But I was hunting earlier, and I still have this on me." Winona nodded. The other 4 patrons consisted of 2 teenage girls and their boyfriends who had stopped in for a bite before heading off to a party. The boys were twins, Anson and Weston Cheney, and their dates were Chetna Patel and Rosalina Gomez. They all shook their heads that they had no weapons. "Anson, grab the axe next to the back exit. Weston, girls, grab the biggest knives you can find from the kitchen." The kids took off, and Ivan said, "I spoke with Mosley. He's setting up a perimeter and is supposed to send us some help here." "I hope they get here soon," Isaac said, "because they just finished with Steve and are headed this way." Everyone watched through the large front windows as the horde came at them. Mudman ran and launched himself at the front door. He hit it with enough force to rattle it in its frame. The shatterproof glass held with a hollow whong. Alligator Man smashed against the window to the left of the door, raking his claws and leaving 4 ragged scrapes in the glass. One of the cadaver girls, the one with the purple X on her face, ran up and began banging her head against the window, leaving a brown smear that was part mud, part blood. The other cadaver girls pushed up against her, clawing and licking the window. The cadaver girls moaned with hunger. Alligator Man and the bear roared with primal need. Mudman gurgled in rage. They all pounded on the windows and door. "Everybody take up a position. Be sure to watch crossfire," Winona said. "Isaac, Willie, get behind the counter. Alvin, next to the jukebox. Kids, 2 on each side of the diner." She stood her ground beside Ivan directly in front of the door. "The rest of you, stay back until you're needed." Mudman pounded on the glass, and a large crack began forming in the upper corner. He pounded again, and the crack cut its way down the door in a jagged diagonal pattern. The two-faced bear lumbered up and grabbed the door handle. It yanked back, wrenching the door a fraction of an inch in its frame. Winona saw the door wasn't going to hold much longer. The diner consisted of mostly booths with a couple of tables scattered about. She grabbed one of the tables and shoved it against the door, just in case it gave way. "It's Granny Dingo!" Stevie yelled, pointing behind the horde. Ivan and Winona looked and saw the old hag floating along, Manson behind her. "Where are the sisters?" Ivan said. "We can't kill these things. Roxy needs to reverse the spell." Just then, Big Mama hobbled into the light behind Granny Dingo. She was followed by Kitty, who was helping Roxy along. "Roxy doesn't look so good," Winona said. Ivan had hope. "Maybe so. But at least they're here." The bear gave the door another yank, pulling it open another fraction of an inch. Red X Girl wore a slimy mask of hate. She snarled, showing steel white teeth, and she fixed her eyes on Rosalina, clearly ready to tear into the girl as soon as she could get in. Granny Dingo floated to within 10 yards of the horde as it smashed and raged to get inside the diner. "Fight," she said to Manson. The dog shot off toward the bear. It came up beside the beast and tore into its leg, nearly severing it at the knee. The bear snarled and snapped at the dog. Manson jumped out of the way and latched onto the bear's other leg, stopping it from pulling at the door. But it was too late. The door frame was warped enough that Mudman was able to get a grasp and yank the door from its hinges. As soon as the door was off of the hinges, the cadaver girls ran inside. Red X Girl grabbed Rosalina by the hair and started to chomp down, but Chetna stabbed her in the face. Red X Girl screamed and jumped back, the knife sticking out of her left cheek. She turned to Chetna, eyes full of hate and hunger, and lunged. Ivan stepped over and placed a shot in her head, knocking her to the ground. She continued to crawl toward Chetna with half a face. Chetna climbed up on the counter. The remaining 2 cadaver girls ran through the diner, teeth bared and looking for blood. Isaac put a shotgun round into the girl with the orange X on her face, knocking her into a booth. She landed on the table and stayed down, at least for the moment. The girl with the purple X on her face rushed at Dean. He sliced the kukri across her chest, making a deep cut that seeped rancid lake water. She grabbed his free arm and bit down, causing him to yell out in pain. He shoved the kukri down into her skull, and she wrenched away, the large knife sticking out of the top of her head as black goo seeped from the wound and ran down her face. Winona fired off 3 rounds, 2 at Alligator Man and 1 at Mudman, as they bumped against each other to get through the door. She was hopeful when she saw a patrol car pull into the parking lot behind Granny Dingo and the sisters. The car raced straight toward the front of the diner and slid to a stop about 15 yards away. The driver, Deputy Colbert, jumped out and began yelling at the 2 beasts fighting to get through the door, trying to get their attention. The passenger door opened, and Deputy Williams stepped out. They both held their guns ready. Alligator Man turned, roared, and ran at them. Colbert was a 30-year-old man who had seen a lot during his 5 years as a deputy. He showed no surprise and began taking carefully aimed shots at Alligator Man. Deputy Williams was a rookie. She had heard rumors, but had never seen anything like this before. She stood, mouth open, in complete shock as Alligator Man slammed into her, chomping down on her neck. They fell onto the parking lot in a bloody death roll. Deputy Colbert knew that she was gone, and that the monster that was ravaging her was momentarily occupied. So he turned his attention to the giant beast running his way. He squeezed off 2 rounds, but Mudman was too close and not able to be killed by mere bullets. Mudman grabbed Colbert by the throat, lifted him off his feet, and used his massive fist to punch him in the face, crushing his skull. He dropped Colbert's lifeless body and turned back to the diner. "Cease!" Granny Dingo yelled when she had gotten close enough that the horde could hear her. The horde stopped dead in its tracks. Big Mama walked up to the front of the diner. She was followed by Kitty and Roxy, who was now walking on her own but still looked glassy-eyed and dazed. Big Mama looked at the carnage and said, "Well, ain't this a hell of a mess?" Ivan grimaced, biting back the urge to shoot her in the face for making light of all this death. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to make you pay for this." Big Mama smirked. "If you're talking about suing us, go ahead and try. We ain't got nothing." "That's not what he means," Winona said. Roxy stumbled forward, finger pointed at Ivan and Winona. "We don't give a shit what he means," she slurred. "You can kiss my ass, is what you can do. We are witches and we—" "Hush," Granny Dingo said. "They're right. You three have caused a lot of damage tonight, and a lot of needless death." She turned to Ivan and Winona and the others who were now standing warily behind them. "What's been done can't be undone. But I give my word that I'll make sure the sisters are dealt with." Big Mama, Roxy, and Kitty gave Granny Dingo a nervous look, but kept their mouths shut. Winona looked as if she didn't care too much about taking the word of a witch. "What are you going to do with these monsters?" Granny Dingo turned to Roxy. "Do it, girl, and make it quick." Roxy nodded. She closed her eyes, trying to focus through her concussion. She began to recite a spell in Creole. After it was finished, she said, "Morai!" Mudman began to fall apart. First his arms, then his head, then his torso. Within seconds, all that was left was a black mound of mud, squirming with worms, bugs, and snakes. Alligator Man dropped and began to transform from the half-human beast he was into a normal alligator. Everyone was so shocked at watching the miraculous transformation that no one had the presence of mind to shoot it before it shot off across the parking lot and into the forest. The three cadaver girls fell to the floor, dead. And now that the roar of battle was quieted, they could hear sirens heading their way. "That'll be the sheriff and backup," Ivan said. He looked over his shoulder at Rory and Stevie. "One of you call for some paramedics and get them on the way." "We need to get," Big Mama said. She turned, and instead of heading for the road, she made her way to the trees, careful to stay out of sight of the sheriff. Roxy and Kitty followed. Winona and Ivan both knew that this was not the time nor the place for the sheriff to attempt to arrest the sisters. They looked at Granny Dingo, who stood hovering before them. "How are you going to bring about justice?" Winona said. Granny Dingo narrowed her eyes. "Justice," she said. "There's no such thing as justice, woman. But I told you, I'll deal with it." With that, Granny Dingo looked over at Manson and said, "Let's go." Then she turned and floated off after the sisters, followed by the dog. Winona shook her head in disgust. "Let's help the injured until the paramedics get here." Isaac was already administering first aid to Dean's wound. Rory and Stevie were helping Chetna and Rosalina attend to the scratches they'd received during the brawl. Willie looked at the three cadaver girls. "They all have X's drawn on their faces." "When I first saw them, I figured they were probably victims of a serial killer," Rory said. Willie thought on this for a moment. "I can see why you'd think that. They all look similar. Same hair, same build, same age." "Lord, I hope we don't have another serial killer on the loose," Winona said. "That's the last thing this town needs." "She's wrong, you know," Stevie said. He had finished helping Chetna pour peroxide on a deep claw mark on her arm. "Who is?" Ivan said. Everyone had stopped what they were doing and was looking at Stevie. Granny Dingo, he said. She said there was no such thing as justice. Dean looked out onto the parking lot at what was left of Steve and the two deputies. He considered how the sisters had walked away with no remorse. It looks to me like she's spot on. It doesn't appear they're going to be held accountable for any of this. Stevie turned to Dean. What we just witnessed was evil in action, right? Dean took a moment to consider his response. Okay, kid, I'll give you that. Only evil would conjure up such monsters or do such horrible things to these three dead girls. What's your point? Stevie looked around at the others, seeing they were all curious as to where he was going. If we are comfortable admitting that there's evil and it has power, why can't we accept the idea that there is the opposite of evil and that it also has power? Dean was a good man, but he had seen people do terrible things to each other on the battlefields of Afghanistan. I see where you're going, son, but people are just bad. They have selfish, dark hearts. And if there is some powerful good force, why does it let things like this happen? Chetna said. She looked at the girls with the colored X's drawn on their faces. They were her age and had once been beautiful. Stevie considered his answer. Then he straightened as if in defiance of the darkness and the doubt. Well, the way I see it is we all want the right to choose our own lives, right? If there is an all-powerful good and it forced us to do its will, then how would we ever be free to be ourselves? Maybe it lets us choose the side we want to be on. What are you saying? Anson said. He was a smart kid with a kind heart, but wasn't sure exactly how he saw the world around him. Stevie shrugged. I'm saying, if we want to be free to choose our own paths, we have to be willing to understand that means others are also free to choose, even if they choose to be evil like those witch sisters. How does that help? Anson said. I mean, they still get away completely free. They aren't going to have to answer for any of this. Stevie and Rory had talked about this very idea after nearly being killed in Trailer 66 by the ghost of Nevermore's most notorious serial killer. If we are given the freedom to choose, then there has to be consequences for choosing to do bad things, right? And if we choose bad and we don't get justice while alive, then I believe we're going to get that justice when we meet that power that gives us the choice. I agree, Rory said, supporting his friends. Them trailer park witches are going to get what they deserve. If not here, then when they step on to the other side of life. Winona gave Stevie an affirming nod. She looked at the faces of the others and saw that the boy had given them all something to think about. From the mouth of babes, she said. Amen, Isaac said as he unlocked the door to let Sheriff Mosley in. Damn, Winona, Mosley said. He wore a cowboy hat and sunglasses, even though it was full-on dark outside. His face was a mask of concern and mourning for the loss of his deputies. What was it this time? Winona sighed. It was full of frustration and in danger of becoming despair. Full-on evil, she said. They had taken some casualties, but she was emboldened by their victory and given a measure of hope from little Stevie's words. But we chose to stand up to it, she said, and at least for the moment, we beat it.